Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai, Chapter 2, Halacha 1. This is Part 4 of the Shir. In the Art Scroll, it's 16b1. Today, we're going to be covering special area in Eretz Yisrael, Bet She'an. Bet She'an, by the way, has a very special architectural object that has been found. It's actually just next to Bet She'an. There's a synagogue that's there, and in that synagogue, they found mosaic from about 1,800 years ago that has on it the agricultural laws. It's the oldest piece of Torah Baal Peh that's preserved anywhere in the world. And we see over there, what is it talking about? It's talking about what is in the land for Maestros and what is out of the land. It's going to be what is going to be considered the Ole Bavel territory and not. This is in the area of Bet She'an, and you can visit it today. Now, the historical status of Bet She'an is a little bit complicated, and it really needs its own topic, and that's why we're going to be covering it today. So it's really going to be an issue not only for tithes, but also for shvius and shvius sanctity and produce, and then as well for the local agriculture, local economy. And they're basically going to be leaving Bet She'an out of the Ole Bavel territory. It means it's going to be excluded from tithes and shvius sanctity, because they wanted to carve out an area that poor people could go to no matter what, and they could have access to easy, cheap food. So the Gemara starts off, and Rabbi Zera cited Rabbi Chia in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that Rebbe exempted the area of Bet She'an from the restrictions that apply during Shvius. So what would those be? Well, we saw this in Chapter 1, Halacha 1, and Chapter 2, Halacha 1. This is going to be for plowing fields of grain or for orchards. We know that you are not allowed to plow the ground before Shvius, and for a field of grain, it is going to be up until Pesach, first day of Pesach, and for orchard, on a halachic orchard, it's going to be up until Shavuot. And there's going to be other things about agricultural laws that are going to be there. Now, there's some confusion. Some people are going to think that Bet She'an actually was never sanctified at all as part of Eretz Yisrael. That's going to be an opinion that comes up in Shvius by Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who's an Amorah, held that actually this area here was owned by Sisera, who was in the Tanakh, by the way, and that it was never actually conquered by Jews. His student, very fitting, it should be Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, his student has Eliyahu and Navi come to his student and say, no, actually this was at one point owned by Jews, and then non-Jews took away the land. What would that mean? That would mean that it was actually taken by the Jews, so it would have shvius sanctity and be subject to tithes. Now, when Rebbe is doing his investigation, he's going to be concluding that it had been sanctified, and it actually, they're going to be saying that it was sanctified during the time of the Ole Mitzrayim. There's going to be a debate whether it was part of the Ole Mitzrayim territory and then not the territory from the Ole Bavel. Some are going to say that it was never sanctified by anybody, not Yeshua and the conquering armies, not anybody. So we're going to be getting into this area that is also going to be coming up in Shvius, and you can find the parallel in our Shir in Masechet Shvius. So the permit's going to go like this. From the testimony, says this Gemara, this is going to be literally from the mouth. This is literally what it says in the Aramaic here. From the testimony of Yeshua ben Zeruz. This, by the way, is not listed as a rabbi, And it continues, it says, this is the son of Rabbi Meir's father-in-law, who said, I saw a garden on Shvius, and since Rabbi Meir would not have done this unless the area had not been sanctified as Eretz Yisrael, Rebbe exempted all of Bet Shean. So the idea is that this is not only going to be the city of Bet Shean, this is going to be the surrounding areas. The Gemara is going to give a map, effectively, by talking about landmarks coming up on where is going to be in the land and where is going to be out. It's not just the city, it's the surrounding fields. And this garden is a very famous one in Shvius and in the Halachot. And this garden belonged to a non-Jew. And it's the well-known opinion of Rabbi Meir that a non-Jew does not have ownership of land in Eretz Yisrael. And that, by the way, is going to exempt it from tithes and Trumos Maestros and Shvius. Now, this comes up in Masechet Shvius in chapter 6. And this also is going to be coming up in Trumos and Maestros. This is going to be a debate where Rabbi Meir is going to be saying that non-Jews cannot ever own land in Eretz Yisrael. This is not the halacha, but he's actually saying that this is a Doraita law, that it's going to be your land. When God gives it to the Jews, your land, this is only going to be to the Jews and not to the non-Jews. And that means that if a non-Jew has possession of the land and grows produce on it, it does not actually have, he doesn't actually own it. And so this is going to be where it would be exempt from tithes because a non-Jew, according to Rabbi Meir, can't own land. So the idea here is that Rabbi Meir is saying that Bet Shean is going to be a sanctified part of Eretz Yisrael, or if Rabbi Meir is going to hold that it's going to be a sanctified part of Eretz Yisrael, then the money Rabbi Meir would give the non-Jew for the purchase of a vegetable would have Shvius sanctity. But Rabbi Meir wouldn't have done that. That's the point, because you're not allowed to give money to buy produce or money that actually has Shvius sanctity on it to a non-Jew. So in other words, you have this money, it's been desanctified through a transaction where the produce loses the sanctity, it goes on to the money, and then you're not allowed to give this to a non-Jew. You're not allowed to do transactions with it, because then what happens is they're going to end up, you can end up where you reconsecrate it, but you can't actually give them the money because it has the sanctity. They can't dispatch the sanctity, and they can't use it. And also, in a way, you're wasting something that has kedusha. You're not allowed to do that. So what this is trying to say is that Rabbi Meir, from this opinion or this testimony, would be that Bet Shean does not have the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Meir is holding that Bet Shean had never been conquered by the Jews that came from the conquering army in the time of Yeshua, and it was also not conquered or sanctified by the Jews in the Ole Bavel time with Ezra. That's what Rabbi Meir is effectively doing and saying by this. By the way, this is not unique to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is actually holding a similar opinion. So the Gemara is going to draw an inference. Rabbi Zera says that this tells us that it is forbidden for a person who's a Torah scholar to do something in public that might be misconstrued by a person who's not a Torah scholar as an unfounded permit. Again, we're talking about Yeshua ben Zeruz, who's not a Torah scholar. And this is going to be where the Torah scholar himself can explain his actions to be legal. However, you have a Marasain problem. So the Gemara continues and says, I would say that this particular garden from where Rabbi Meir purchased the vegetables was specifically known to him to have not have had the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael. And in that case, I would have said that the rest of Bet Shean does have the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael. So over here, says Rosh Cirilio, that Rabbi Meir would have known that the garden was excluded from Eretz Yisrael through a tradition that's handed down to him through his teachers. Now, this is coming up many times. This must have been a tradition that reemerges even in the time of the Amorim, because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is even suggesting it to his students, which is in a much later time. This is in the time of Rabbi Yochanan. So this is a complicated piece of land. It's a complicated area because you're going to have, even if it's part of Eretz Yisrael, parts of it have a tradition that this area over here is not part of it. So Rebbe, when he's looking at this, he's going to be trying to figure out what to do with Bet Shean, because you have this reemergent tradition that parts of it are outside, parts of it might have never been conquered at all by any Jew. So the Gemara asks and says, if so, should Rebbe have taken it upon himself to exempt all of Bet Shean, and what is the basis for doing it? In other words, he's not just excluding this garden, he's excluding all of it. Why? So Rebbe understood that Rabbi Meir would not have acted in public as he did if Rabbi Meir did not hold that the entire Bet Shean region is considered to be outside the land of Israel. And why would that be? Because it's basically saying that the laws of Shvius don't apply there. Not only Shvius, but when you're going to be growing produce, you're not going to have to worry about things with sanctity at all. You don't have to worry about Demai. You don't have to worry about these things. So it's not that Rabbi Meir is saying this particular garden is out. Rebbe is inferring that Rabbi Meir, who by the way was Rebbe's teacher, must have been holding that all of this area was outside, because Rabbi Meir would be ending up with a Mars Ein problem where it would look like he's buying in part of it, and then it would look like he's holding that part of it might be in the land, part of it might not be in the land, and you end up with an inconsistency. It's not good for Torah scholars to do certain acts that might be permissible in front of non-learned people. Now, Rebbe is declaring Bet Shean to be outside of Eretz Yisrael based on this information, and there's also going to be other declarations that Rebbe also declared to be outside of Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says that Rebbe exempted Bet Shean, in other words, that Bet Shean is outside of Eretz Yisrael and is not going to have the Kedusha for Demai or Shvius or worrying about Tevel. The Gemara continues and says Rebbe exempted Caesarea, Rebbe exempted Bet Guvrin, Rebbe exempted Kfar Tzemach. And the idea is that Rebbe exempted all of these areas from the restrictions of Shvius because he's basically determining that they were not conquered by those who extended up from Egypt at the time of Yeshua, but also they were not conquered by those who came from Bavel in the time of Ezra. So the legal status of these areas is to be outside of the land, and therefore the land can be cultivated during Shvius, and by the way, the produce can be eaten there without any of the restrictions that you'd have to worry about with Shvius. Also, you're not going to have to worry about tithes. So the Gemara is going to record another lenient ruling of Rebbe, and what happened. It created quite a controversy. The Gemara says that Rebbe permitted people to purchase vegetables immediately following the Shvius year, and everyone looked askance at his ruling and spoke derogatorily about him. This, let me explain, this is where immediately this is going to be considered a few days or a few weeks after. This is going to be in the 8th year. And we know that as a general thing that if you have aftergrowths that grew during the 7th year, you have a rabbinic decree of Sfichin that these are going to be prohibited. So why? Because it could be that somebody illegally planted this. They were trying to play a trick on the system so that right when the 8th year started, they could have a lot of produce to sell when everybody else is just even starting to go to the field to start to put in seeds. So the Yerushalmi is going to talk about this in Peah, chapter 7, Halacha 3, and it's going to go like this. The story goes where they brought 2 radishes before Rebbe between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and this, by the way, is going to be in the 8th year. This is, the 8th year is determined at Rosh Hashanah, and that this is before Yom Kippur, and these radishes were so big that they were gigantic. In other words, they were the size of a camel, and they were just gigantic. And they came and they asked him, and they said, "Are these radishes okay for consumption? And aren't they just going to be aftergrowths?" In other words, somebody planted them in the 8th year or 7th year, and they grew naturally, but they're prohibited because of a rabbinic restriction to try to cut down on cheaters at the time. And they said to him that they were actually planted in the new year. They're not aftergrowths. They had people come and testify that these were actually planted after Rosh Hashanah. They grew very quickly, perhaps during a week. And Rebbe is going to be permitting, based on this, people to buy vegetables immediately following the Shvius year. This, by the way, is the source of the controversy, because people are not really used to this kind of permit. In other words, people would have thought that it would have taken longer for the vegetables to grow, and maybe this permit shouldn't have been issued at all. In Shvius, chapter 6, Halacha 4, there's going to be a different explanation. The explanation over there is going to be that Rebbe permits the vegetables after Shvius, based on there being more imports from outside of the land, and because many of the vegetables are imported, there's no reason to say that the vegetables found in the marketplace would be products that would be grown in the 7th year and forbidden as Shemitah produce under the laws of Sfichin. So either way, whether you're going to be having more vegetables coming from outside of the land right after Shvius, or you're going to be having these amazing growths from the people at this time, either way, he lifted this, and again, right after, a few days after, or even a couple of weeks after, allowing people to purchase produce immediately. So Rebbe is going to defend his right to defer the ruling of the previous generations, and Rebbe said to them, "Come and let us judge the merits of this case." And he says, "It is written, and this is going to be the king of Judah, Hezekiah, crumbled the copper serpent that Moshe Rabbeinu had made, and until those days, the children of Israel came and burnt incense to it, and they called it a god. They made it into an idol." You can find this in a story in Kings 2:18-4, and so he came and destroyed something that Moshe Rabbeinu made. And the Gemara is going to continue with Rebbe's statement. It says, "Was there no righteous person who arose from the time of Moses until the time of Hezekiah to remove the copper serpent from the world?" And he's basically asking why, there were lots of righteous people. There was Asa and Yehoshaphat. These are righteous kings. And they came and tried to destroy whatever idols that the Jewish people made at the time. So why, according to Rebbe, why is Asa and Yehoshaphat, who's famous for destroying these idols, leave the copper serpent? And the Gemara says that, therefore, that crown that the Holy One, blessed is He, left for Hezekiah to be crowned with, and similarly with us with regards to the Holy One, blessed is He, left this crown for us to be crowned with. So this is, says the Yafei Marah, this is where, before the time of Rebbe, it was permitted to buy produce in the marketplace, immediately following the years of the Shemitah, until it could be assumed that the local farms were producing enough where it became the majority of what, would be, and that you're basically saying that there's no way that this could be from eighth year produce. So the Yafei Marah is basically saying that these two kings were basically holding the opinion that, you're not allowed to destroy the copper serpent. And why? Because it was made by Moshe Rabbeinu. And these, they're saying that, God commanded it to be made. And this really is showing the great merit of destroying the copper serpent by Hizkiah. Hizkiah is really, this crown through which, he glorified Hashem by destroying something that was misused. So you have this amazing story where the Jews start taking something that was commanded by Hashem and created by Moshe Rabbeinu and misused, and they start to worship it. And you can see that, with the entire religion of Christianity, that they take the book that, God created, and they misuse it, and they construe it to get Jews and others to try to worship idols. And one day, just like Hizkiah destroyed the copper serpent in the glorification of Hashem, so too Christianity and that entire worldview of trying to misuse the Torah will be erased from the world as well. And that will be a sanctification of Kiddush Hashem. So we see here that Rebbe ruled that Bet Shean is exempt from Shvius, by the way, also from tithes. So we have this story that came up in Shvius, and that's going to be with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who does not end up accepting Rebbe's ruling. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would command the boys, this is going to be, I think, his students, who served him as follows, and says, do not buy vegetables for me in Bet Shean during Shvius, except from the garden of Sisera. Now, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is holding a tradition that that this area of Bet Shean was conquered except for the garden. And so only the garden is going to be exempt from Shvius sanctity and tithes, not anywhere else. And basically Rabbi Yeshua is holding that an idol worshiper can have ownership of the land of Eretz Yisrael, and he's also saying that produce that's purchased from an idol worshiper's field during Shvius is going to be permitted. And he's basically saying that this was always owned by non-Jews, therefore it doesn't have Shvius sanctity. And part of the conquest was that when the Jews are taking the land, they're creating Kedusha from not only the land, but also from what will grow out of the land in the future. So he's holding that, I think, much like some other people held, that there was a tradition there that it was this farm. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is holding that land cannot be stolen. This, by the way, is going to be a maloket about whether land can be stolen or not. And he's holding that land can never be stolen. It can be used, it could be settled on, but it can't actually be taken away from somebody. This, by the way, comes up in Jewish law today, where what's going to be the status of land between Jews and non-Jews as well. There is Maloket Tanayim, whether this land can actually transfer title at all. And again, Rabbi Meir holds that you can never own it. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai holds that an idol worshiper can own it. So The Gemara continues and says, on this occasion, he was remembered for good. This, by the way, is always a reference to Eliyahu Nevi. So basically, Eliyahu Nevi is going to be standing together with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's student and says to him, go tell your master that this garden did not really belong to Sisera. Rather, it belonged to a Jew, and Sisera killed him and took it from him. And Sisera and his successors gained control of the garden through this act of thievery. And accordingly, you should consider the land to still be Jewish-owned. And basically, he's also holding, Eliyahu Nevi himself is holding that Jewish land cannot be stolen, and it is always to be deemed in the owner's jurisdiction. And even if the owner has yush and gives up hope of abandoning it, the land always remains the property of the original owner. And therefore, according to this opinion, that an idol worshiper can have ownership of the land of Eretz Yisrael would not be valid, because he's saying that it was actually Jewish-owned, and because it's Jewish-owned, it's going to be subject to the laws of Shvius. So the Gemara is going to continue, and basically Eliyahu Nevi is holding that land that is also in a position where it can't be stolen. The counter position is going to be that after a certain period of time, that even land that's stolen can be acquired. So the Gemara continues, and it says that, he says, so if you seek to be stringent with yourself, says Eliyahu Nevi, then be the same as your colleagues. In other words, adopt the stringent view that an idol worshiper can have ownership of the land in Eretz Yisrael with respect to releasing it from the Shvius obligations. He's saying, don't just, take one lenient opinion and one strict opinion. If you're going to take the strict opinion, take all the strict opinions. That's what Eliyahu Nevi says. And according to the letter of the law, if you have, the land in possession of the idol worshippers, it would be exempt from Shvius and Demai and tithes. And even though that he avoided, fields other than the garden of Sisera, he thought that, this is going to be like a great stringency. And since we do not assume a circumstance that would, change the law where none is apparent, so this is going to be that whoever has the possession of a property, is going to have it legally. And Eliyahu Nevi's message to him is this, saying that really, if you want to be stringent on avoiding any field, so that here's a field that was seized by a Jew, and don't call it the Garden of Sisera. In fact, this was actually seized from a Jew, and so you should actually follow the stringent opinion of your colleagues that an idol worshiper's ownership does not exempt the land. In other words, he's saying that because if you're taking the stringent opinion that this was never acquired, and then at least take the position that actually, by the way, I'm telling you as Eliyahu Nevi, this actually did belong to the Jew, it was stolen, and you should actually have the rest of the strict opinion, which is going to be that this is still going to belong to a Jew, still going to have Shvius sanctity. And so if you're buying from this field, you should be strict on yourself with the tithes and also with Shvius. Now, yes, Rebbe did exempt produce that grew in Bet Shean from the requirements of tithes, also, by the way, from Shvius. But this does not apply to produce that comes from Eretz Yisrael into Bet Shean. We covered this earlier in chapter 2. If you are importing product from outside of the land, even if you're getting possession of it in the land, it's still going to be treated like product that came from outside of the land. And so too, over here, if you're getting product in Bet Shean, and if you're getting it in a way where you could start to assume that it was actually an import from Eretz Yisrael and not produced in one of these like little local areas, then you have to start looking at it in terms of Demai and tithes and Shvius produce, even though you're taking possession of it in Bet Shean, which is not going to have that. Now, Rabbi Yosei of Kfar Dan says in the name of Rabbi Madya that these are the items that are forbidden in Bet Shean. So what items are these going to be? This is going to be the fennel, sesame seeds, mustard seeds, garlic, bulhosin. These are going to be a type of figs. Black afunin that are sold in bulk. These are going to be black chickpeas, by the way. The Gemara continues, says provincial onions that are sold in bulk. And the Egyptian bean that is bundled with a strand of reed grass. And mint that is bundled by itself. And the istfanini plant. The istfanini plant are going to be parsnips. And all of these items that we just listed are always prohibited. And they are basically prohibited throughout the year. And it continues, it says that the leeks are prohibited only from Shavuot until Hanukkah. And so all these other items besides the leeks do not grow in Bet Shean, and therefore they're always presumed to have been grown and imported from Eretz Yisrael proper into Bet Shean. And so if you're seeing this, you have to assume that, it's going to be tithed like Demai. Now, in the rest of the Shvius cycle in the 6 years, you're going to treat it like Demai. And in the 7th year, you're going to have to look at this like a possible Shvius violation because, again, you're not allowed, or either a Shvius violation, or you're going to have to assume it's a 6th year plant. In other words, you're going to assume that this is not really from a Shvius merchant, but rather that this came from the 6th year, even though it's the 7th year, and you're going to tithe it with Demai. Now, the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, Rabbi Zera says, this is unlike the rest of the items in the list, that both prohibited leeks and permitted leeks are available in Bet Shean throughout the year, but at different times, there are going to be more than one than the other. Again, we're going to go by the majority. So, yes, even though there are some local leeks, the majority is coming from from Eretz Yisrael. And because that's going to be the majority, you have to assume that you're buying from the majority of the leeks and not assume that it's a Bet Shean leek. However, Rabbi Zera is pointing out, from Shavuot until Hanukkah, the amount of prohibited leek that is being sold in the marketplace is greater than the amount of permitted leek. In other words, that this is saying that during this period of time from Hanukkah until Shavuot, being the opposite way around, that the majority of the leek is going to be local from Bet Shean, and again from Shavuot until Hanukkah, this is going to be coming from Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara is going to continue and talk about the amount of prohibited leek that is being sold in the marketplace is greater than the amount of permitted leek. And it says from Hanukkah until the next Shavuot, the amount of permitted leek that is being sold in the marketplace is greater than the amount of prohibited leek. In other words, that this is trying to say that over here, the prohibited leek, this is talking about leeks from Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because it's going to be subject to the requirements of Shemitah, and it's also going to have to be tithed. And the permitted leeks, these are going to be the ones that grew in Hutz. In this case, is going to be Bet Shean. This, by the way, would also be the case for the area along the sea in Caesarea. So the Gemara is going to talk more about other agricultural prohibitions with Sfichin, and this is going to apply as a rabbinic rule. And the Gemara continues, and it says that concerning the prohibition of Sfichin throughout Eretz Yisrael in the year after the Shemitah, in other words, that's going to be Rosh Hashanah and on from the time of the 8th year in the cycle. So the Gemara says that the prohibition of aftergrowths, this is Sfichin, extends from Rosh Hashanah of the 8th year until Hanukkah. This is going to be the beginning of Hanukkah. The permit of aftergrowth, says the Gemara, extends from the beginning of Hanukkah of the 8th year until Shavuot of the 8th year. However, from Shavuot until the following Rosh Hashanah, there's no need to investigate as to whether the produce should be prohibited or permitted. So this is a case where, if you have a case where something is not yet growing, and what is growing in the field is going to be, in likelihood, something that grew during the 7th year, sometimes it takes a while for something to be ready for harvest. In the case of leeks can actually grow for multiple years. They can grow for 3 years. So the bulb, that is. So over here, you can have a case where, something like figs or dates or onions can be where they actually germinated and started growing in the 7th year, and then just picking them in the 8th year would be a problem because perhaps if they reached a third of their maturity in the 7th year, this is going to be forbidden, and it's going to have shvius sanctity. And we know, by the way, on a vegetable like if you're picking kuzbara or something like that, a leafy fresh vegetable, that's going to be the year in which you pick it. So if it started to grow in the 7th year and you pick it and you're going to use it right away, like mint or something like that, that's going to be considered 8th year produce. But we're talking about something that's going to be like a date or like a pomegranate, and this is going to be something that can be on a tree for a while, can reach a third of the growth. Certainly, a pomegranate would reach a third of its growth before Rosh Hashanah, and can stay on the tree up until Hanukkah. So that's going to be a case where you can have a case where these are clearly going to be aftergrowths, and you're not allowed to use them and sell them. So the Gemara is going to continue with Rabbi Yosei of Kfar Dan's list. And the list is going to be what items are going to be forbidden in Bet Shean, and Rabbi Zera's clarification of the law on the leeks. And it's going to continue listing the other items that are forbidden in Bet Shean. And the Gemara continues and says, chate melons, gourds, watermelons, cantaloupes, oil, off-sea dates, and some say even termos beans, and also paschalach. This, by the way, is going to be a type of bean, says the Pnei Moshe. And these items are presumed to have grown in Eretz Yisrael and then imported into Bet Shean. And the Gemara says that they're always restricted, unlike these leeks. In other words, the leeks, which are weird in halacha anyway, we covered this in the second Shvius, it's weird because they can grow for multiple years. And also, there's going to be 2 parts in the halacha for the leek. One is going to be the leaf, and the other part is going to be the bulb. So you can have a case where, the bulb will not have shvius sanctity, but the leaf will. Or you can have a case where the bulb will have shvius sanctity, but the leaves will not. Why? Because the leeks, the bulb can, again, go for 3 years. So you could theoretically have it where the bulb grew in the 6th year, it continued growing in the 7th year, made leaves in the 7th year, the leaves died in the 7th year, and then new leaves emerge in the 8th year, and you pick it in the 8th year. This is going to be considered as if it is going to be 6th year produce, not subject to shvius. So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say that these items, when purchased in Bet Shean during shvius, are governed by the laws of shvius. Gemara continues, says, in the other years of the 7-year cycle, what is the law regarding tithing of these items? Rabbi Yonah says they are subject to tithes as Demai. And Rabbi Yosei says that they are tithed as definite tevel. So that's a big contrast. The Gemara is going to try to explain the view of Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yosei, and that actually they're not in contrast at all. So what is going to be the nuance? The Gemara says that Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yosei do not disagree. And that which Rabbi Yonah says is that they are tithed as Demai, refers to where he purchased the produce from the market middleman who were mostly Jewish. And that which Rabbi Yosei says is that they were tithed as definite tevel, and that refers to where the produce comes from garden farmers themselves, and in this area, at least half of whom were Kuthians. Again, we covered this in the beginning of chapter 2, Halacha 1. The Kuthians would separate the tithes for their own produce, but when they sold it to others, they did not separate the tithes at all. That means that you are getting definite tevel. So, again, there's a lot of nuance going on over here. You have to worry about what's in the land, what's out of the land. You have to worry about, is this grown by Kuthians? Are the middlemen, are they going to be Jewish? Are they going to be non-Jewish? What is the majority of the produce at this time? Is this going to be from in the land or out of the land? There's a lot of complexity going on here. So we learned earlier that Rebbe declared Bet Shean to be outside of Eretz Yisrael. This is going to be in Shvius sanctity as well as tithes. Now, the Gemara is going to give us the borders of the Bet Shean area, and it's going to say, until when is considered Bet Shean? And the Gemara continues and says the Bet Shean region includes Parshta and Retzlifta and Nafsha Defuntia, and extends until Kfar Karnaim. So these places all border Bet Shean, says Rabbi Kanievsky, and the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say, having listed the types of produce that are forbidden in Caesarea and Bet Shean, the Gemara now is going to talk about produce that's forbidden in this third area. That's going to be Panias. Panias, this is going to be the town of Pameas that the Bavli says in Berachot 55a. This is going to be somewhere in the Banyas area. It's going to be an area in the north upper Galilee, somewhere around the Mount Hermon. And this is an area that is close to the Banyas that you can visit today, which has a lot of streams and rivers and forests up in the north. Very, very beautiful. So the Gemara lists these items that are prohibited up there. And it says walnuts, rice, sesame seeds, and the Egyptian bean. And Gamliel Zuga says early ripening dates are also prohibited in Panias. In other words, that walnuts, rice, sesame seeds, Egyptian beans are prohibited because they are imported to that area from Eretz Yisrael. That's why. So the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say that Rabbi Yonah says that this was stated in regard to Panias from Tanergol, Caesarea, and above Caesarea. We are talking about Caesarea Philippi, which is in the Golan area. We're not talking about Caesarea along the sea. The Gemara continues and says, but from Tarnagola, Caesarea, and below, has the same status as Eretz Yisrael. So we're talking about an area that beyond Caesarea Philippi is going to be out of the land, and from Caesarea Philippi and the Golan is going to be within the area that was conquered by Ezra, the Ole Bavel. And Rabbi Yonah is going to wonder something. He's going to say, if somebody's field is in the region of Panias and it was planted with vegetables, and he later came and he found rice growing in the field, can the law possibly be that the vegetables are going to be permitted and the rice is going to be prohibited? Also, he asks, if rice was planted above, in other words, outside of Eretz Yisrael, and vegetables were planted below, closer to Eretz Yisrael, can the law be that the vegetables would be permitted but the rice prohibited? And Rabbi Yonah is actually going to resolve this himself. He says, in truth, the reason why only rice and other listed items are prohibited is because most of these fields in Panias commonly produced only these kinds of produce. And so the sages, basically, according to Rabbi Yonah, is saying that the decree to cover the kinds of crops that is usual to grow in Panyas and not with crops that are unusual to grow in Panyas. So the decree that's forbidding rice, which is normally grown in Panyas but permits vegetables, even if the vegetables grew closer to Eretz Yisrael than the rice. And the Gemara is actually going to reject it.